The wind carried the smell of smoke through the narrow alleys of Vienna that autumn, wrapping around the old cafes where artists once gathered. Jewish painters and musicians felt the city tighten around them like a noose. Galleries that had once shown their work now posted signs refusing entry. Studios were searched at dawn. Friends disappeared into the night without word. Elias stood at his window, watching soldiers march below. His latest canvas leaned against the wall, half finished, colors too bright for the fear that filled the room. He had heard the rumors for months, whispered in kitchens and back rooms. Shanghai was open, no visas required, a port city on the other side of the world that still took in strangers when every European harbor turned them away. The journey would be long and uncertain, but it was the only door left. He packed his brushes and a few tubes of paint into a battered suitcase. His wife, Lena, folded her sheet music and tucked it between layers of clothing. They moved quietly, afraid that even the sound of closing drawers might draw attention. Outside, the streets grew emptier each evening as more families made the same choice. Trains carried them across Europe toward Marseille, where a single steamship waited at the docks. The harbor smelled of salt and oil. Families huddled on the pier with their belongings bundled in cloth. Children clutched small toys while parents stared at the grey water. Elias felt the weight of the suitcase in his hand and wondered what he would paint when the only familiar thing left was the sea ahead. The gangway creaked under their feet as they climbed aboard. The ship's horn sounded once, low and final, before the engines began to turn. The ship eased into the crowded port of Shanghai under a low sky, its engines rumbling to a halt as ropes were thrown to the dockhands. Elias stepped onto the gangway with the others, his suitcase heavy against his leg, and the noise of the city rose to meet them. Shouts in several languages, the clatter of carts, and the distant wail of a train. Families from the voyage scattered quickly into the streets, clutching their bundles, while he lingered a moment to watch the grey water lap at the pilings. They moved in small groups at first, artists and musicians and writers who had travelled together without naming their plans aloud. The port teemed with soldiers and vendors, but the artists slipped past checkpoints by keeping their heads down and their voices low. One by one they located the abandoned houses along narrow lanes near the old French Quarter, structures with broken shutters and empty rooms that the occupation had left untouched for now. Elias found a corner house with a cracked courtyard and carried his paints inside, setting the suitcase on the floorboards that still smelled of dust and rain. By nightfall, more had arrived, carrying easels wrapped in cloth and instruments in battered cases. They barred the doors from the inside and lit a single lamp. A violin emerged from its case, its strings tuned softly so the sound would not carry beyond the walls. Someone began to read lines of poetry from a folded sheet of paper, the words falling into the dim room like rain on stone. Elias unpacked his brushes and mixed colors on a cracked plate, sketching the curve of a shoulder from memory while the others watched. The days settled into a rhythm of quiet work and shared meals cooked over a small stove. They painted scenes of the sea they had left behind and the city that now held them, trading canvases for food when money ran low. Music drifted through the evenings in careful measures, a flute answering a guitar in the next room. Poetry was recited in whispers during the blackouts, lines that spoke of exile and color and the stubborn pull of creation. Outside, patrols passed in the streets, but inside the houses the colony took root, each new arrival adding a voice or a brushstroke to the hidden whole. As the patrols grew bolder in the streets outside, the colony learned to move like shadows between the cracks. They slipped through checkpoints with forged papers and borrowed faces, turning tailors into soldiers and painters into clerks, with nothing more than a change of coat and a practiced accent. When raids swept through the quarter at dawn, the artists had already rolled their canvases into false walls and tucked sketches beneath floorboards that creaked only for trusted feet. Networks of sympathetic locals passed messages in coded grocery lists, guiding newcomers to safe attics where the work could continue by candlelight after curfew. Betrayal came close more than once. A whispered tip from a neighbor once sent 3 painters scrambling across rooftops with bundles strapped to their backs. They hid for 2 days in a laundry cellar while soldiers searched the block, listening to boots on the stairs above. Yet the hidden threads held. A bookseller rerouted supplies through back alleys. A cook smuggled food wrapped in newspaper that also carried news of safe houses still standing. Each narrow escape strengthened the quiet resolve to keep creating, even when silence seemed the only way to survive another night. Music still answered the dark hours, though softer now, and poems found new lines about endurance and the small rebellions of color on paper. When liberation finally arrived, the colony emerged into streets that no longer whispered danger at every corner. Canvases were unrolled in daylight for the first time in years, and the full measure of what had been preserved stood revealed. The story they left behind was not one of grand gestures, but of steady hands and shared silence, a testament to how art can root itself in the unlikeliest soil and outlast the storm that tried to pull it free.